Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching a brand new edition of India's World with me, Frank Razan Pereira. The state visit by Chinese President Xi Jinping to Myanmar on January 17th and 18th, the first of its kind in 19 years, was a transformative event in regional politics from the perspective of China-Myanmar bilateral relations as well as the region as a whole. The joint statement issued on January 18 claims that a new chapter has been opened in the everlasting friendship between the two countries, stemming from the broad understanding to promote comprehensive strategic cooperation. It refers to building the Myanmar-China community with a shared future. Exchanges of experience and governance will be deepened and strategic communication will be enhanced. Besides, the two governments plan to make good use of the 2+2 high-level consultations comprising the two foreign ministers and defense ministers. In the domain of infrastructure, a sustained push is being given to turn into reality the proposed China-Myanmar Economic Corridor, a vital component of the Belt and Road Initiative. On this edition of India's World, we will analyze Xi Jinping's visit to Myanmar and its impact on India. Joining me on the program today are Vivek Karju, former ambassador, Jayadev Ranade, President, the Center for China Analysis and Strategy, and Major General Dhruv C. Katoch, retired Director, India Foundation. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of India's World. Ambassador, I'd like to begin the program with you. How would you look back at Xi Jinping's visit to Myanmar, and why has it taken 19 years for a president to China to visit Myanmar?
It is, as your report, or as you said correctly, that it is a very significant event, not only in China-Myanmar bilateral ties, but in the regional context. In my view, the Myanmar people and governments, including the Myanmar army, has had a very interesting approach to China. At one level, there is enormous dependency. At another level, there is a fairly substantial suspicion. In 1988, when the army took over after the elections that were overtaken by the army's decisions and actions, when General Thanchwe was there, the Chinese were the only country that stood by Myanmar. That was a time when we in India were terribly opposed to what was happening in Myanmar. And the Western world, of course, was stringent in its criticism, strident, in fact, in its criticism. The result was that the Myanmaris had no options but the Chinese. I now find it curious that on account of the Rohingya issue, again, as the Myanmaris have found themselves isolated and the target of enormous criticism and condemnation, they are turning back to China. And China is taking this opportunity, is seizing this opportunity strongly. In fact, the Chinese are going to achieve an ambition if all these projects and what is contemplated, what has been announced goes through. They'll be achieving an objective which they didn't find it easy to achieve in all these decades. Hence, I think the Western world in particular has no real understanding of the Myanmar situation and no understanding of Aung San Suu Kyi's predicaments. They've acted in very simplistic ways. The Rohingya issue has to be tackled with sympathy. Of course, the Myanmar army has, or sections of the Myanmar army which perpetrated actions against the Rohingya people, which are completely unacceptable, have to be taken to book. But going over the top has sent Suu Kyi and the Myanmar government entirely towards China. And that has major implications for India.
Sure.
Perhaps we can discuss this subsequently.
Absolutely. We'll discuss that a little ahead in the program. But let me bring in Mr. Ranade into the picture. Why now, Mr. Ranade, after 19 years? What is it that Xi Jinping is expecting out of Myanmar? What is it that he wants Myanmar to do probably in the days and years to come?
Well, I think the timing is significant. It was a very important visit, as it turns out. The timing is significant because Xi Jinping does not want to visit a country without getting some showing that there has been some achievements. And I think at this time, a lot of spade work had been done. China had appointed a special envoy only for Myanmar after the reverses that it suffered when the Americans and the Japanese tried to come in. They failed. That's another matter. But they were able to work out agreement between the Myanmaris and the Chinese on a number of the projects. And we saw 33 memorandums being signed, most of them for projects that were already there. I think there are probably none which are new, but they give a fresh impetus, a fresh push. So that is one. The second is the visit comes at a time when Chinese policy under Xi Jinping have suffered major setbacks with the protests in Hong Kong and the vote for the pro-independence Democratic Progressive Party in Taiwan. So for Xi Jinping, this is a plus as far as his foreign policy is concerned. He can tell his people back home that they have achieved this. And before I conclude, let me point to another achievement of Xi Jinping's in this particular context, is that in the joint statement or the press statement that was issued as he took off and left Myanmar, the Myanmaris have for the first time not only endorsed the One China policy, which is something that China asks everyone to do, but they have also supported China's efforts, and the wording used is very interesting. It's the first time they've done it. Efforts towards reunification of Taiwan, Tibet and Xinjiang, all described as integral parts of China. So this is a very interesting formulation that they have come out with. So I think Xi Jinping has done it with a eye towards domestic politics, and second, to regain ground that China had lost on Myanmar and bring it more firmly within the Chinese sphere of influence.
Sure. All right. So, General Katoch, as far as this whole issue of the West, cornering Aung San Suu Kyi, let's take that particular aspect forward. What happens to full-fledged democracy in Myanmar, number one? Secondly, does this leave Suu Kyi in a difficult spot?
I have always been amazed at the hypocrisy of the West. And again, now they are trying to target Myanmar on human rights records. And it is very selective. When you see the human rights records or what the West has done in places like Pakistan or in many other parts of this world, it is abysmal. And here I find that now on the one specific issue of the Rohingyas, the West is trying to strangle this poor little country. I'm not trying to defend or, you see, the Rohingya issue is a separate issue. But I do not think foreign policies can be conducted on that basis. India made this mistake for a very long time, that we said we will not deal with a military power when Myanmar was under a military rule. And that state continued nearly from the time of independence right up to the 90s when the liberalization process started and the Cold War was over. Then, of course, we started with our Look East policy, which became Act East. But I think here there is what Ambassador Kajju said, and I totally agree with him. There appears to be a very specific myopia when you are dealing with Myanmar at this point of time, and you want to box them in on the Rohingya issue. Because this was an excellent time, an excellent opportunity which the West really had to move in. India sees that opportunity, and we have actually kept a very safe distance as far as, or a very neutral distance, I will say, as far as the Rohingya issue is concerned. But every time when we look at the Rohingya issue, we are looking at it from Western eyes. I think it is time we started looking at it from the eyes of the Myanmaris. Whether right or wrong is not the issue, but they also have a perspective. And their perspective has been that this particular community has come in from Bangladesh. They have settled down in Rakhine. They have moved they have refused to assimilate with the local culture. But most importantly, what really galls the local Myanmari, when you speak to the person, and their think tanks have come here and spoken, is that when we come to the time of independence, all these people didn't want to be a part of Myanmar. They wanted to be a part of Bangladesh or East Pakistan that time. Now, that question of divided loyalties has created those fissures which neither side has really done anything to repair. And I think when Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, when she had to address this issue, I think she had absolutely no choice but to go with the people of Myanmar. She is the custodian of the people in a sense, as far as she's the most popular leader there, the most charismatic leader, the leader with the world face. She had to support her people. And I think if anybody would have been in a place, I don't think they could have behaved differently, regardless of the fact that you bestow upon the lady the Nobel Prize, and they say, okay, because we've given her the Nobel Prize, she will be our lackey. It's not going to work out that way. So I think she had her compulsions. The Myanmarese people have their compulsions. But now if we have to move forward, blacklisting this country or treating it as a pariah country is not going to work. I think much greater understanding is required. There is a requirement, of course, for the Rohingya to go back to Rakhine. There is a requirement for the Rohingya to consciously stay away from all terrorist movements.
Right.
There has been a concerted effort by the Islamic State and other powers, especially even Saudi Arabia was involved in this, to create that element of terrorists within this particular group. Now, I think they have to consciously shed that. There has to be movement on both sides, both on the sides of the Myanmar government and on the side of the Rohingyas. And once we have cast iron assurances, then I think there could be a step, moving forward.
Some progress. Really.
There could be some progress.
Okay.
But as far as Aung San Suu Kyi is concerned, I think what she did, she had absolutely no other option but to do what she had done.
Okay, taking the discussion forward now, let's look at it from an Indian perspective. Ambassador Karju, what does all of this mean for India? How concerned should we be?
I think we should be enormously concerned. If you see, the Chinese are today attempting and succeeding to a large extent in boxing us in. You have the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. And there is this firm nexus to the west of India between China and Pakistan. The Chinese are now, as I submitted to you, achieving their ambition of having a China-Myanmar Economic Corridor, which will cement the China-Myanmar relationship enormously. Something which the Myanmaris, unlike the Pakistanis, were wary of. Because for China, Pakistan, there is the India factor. Here, there is an India factor, but not in inimical terms, as far as Myanmar is concerned. So, this is now getting actualized. In fact, I was in Myanmar as our representative, as our ambassador in 2001 and 2. And at that stage, we were looking at the growing relationship between China and Myanmar economically, and the Chinese drive for, as it was called, the Irrawaddy Corridor. And that, I think, to a large extent will now be realized. And then you move to the south, to the south, you see the possibilities of transformation between in the Sri Lanka-China relationship. So if you look at this, I for one get extremely concerned, and I'm sure our policy makers and our strategic decision makers must be concerned too. And therefore, it seems to me that we've got to now make investments in Myanmar to a major degree.
Okay. Okay. All right. So, Mr. Ranade, the ambassador spoke about how China is trying to corner us really through the CPEC, the CMEC, if you can call it that. And also, let's not forget, there is a very pro-China regime in Sri Lanka as well, and there is a planned state visit also that is to take place very soon. Gotabaya is expected to go to Beijing very soon. And let's not forget about the railway projects in Nepal and so on and so forth. So, is an attempt being made by China deliberately to box us out?
A quick diversionary point, if I may say, just to add to what General Katot said about the Rohingyas and how the Islamic State has been trying to make inroads there. So has the Lashkar-e-Taiba, by the way. They were the first to get in there and set up training camps. But that was just an additional point. I think for a while there was a bit of a reprieve, and we thought that Myanmar might come out once it sees alternate sources of investment coming in. They might come out of the Chinese grip or the Chinese bear hug. And as Ambassador Karju quite rightly said, there was a fairly sizable section in the Myanmar army who were not in favor of going too close to the Chinese or getting dependent on them. And at that stage, the Americans had moved in, the Japanese had moved in, they had set up their embassies there. And it was expected that there would be, a strategic push, if I may use the term, by the Americans to go in there. But unfortunately, that didn't happen for many reasons. And here, let me just recount one of the possibilities that when we decided to move in as India, and we were the ones who were pushing for a number of years for other countries to also engage with Myanmar, we found it extremely difficult because the Chinese had penetrated virtually every level of their bureaucracy, and therefore there were obstructions all along the way. However, I think some of our companies persisted, and we were finally able to make some breakthrough, and we are there. But that is the kind of task that other countries have to contend with, which I'm sorry to say they did not. And when you hear phrases like shared interest between Myanmar and China, it's certainly very worrying, because the Chinese game plan is something quite different. They want to have a community of shared interests. So Myanmar is the first piece of the jigsaw puzzle that already goes in.
Since we're here, Mr. Ranade, the CPEC has run into some kind of trouble in Pakistan. Can we expect the same at some point in time in Myanmar?
I was just coming to that, because I'm not linking it with the, corridor, the Myanmar corridor, but shall I say, the dominant population in Myanmar are the Buddhists. And they don't want to get along with, or rather they have problems with the Rohingyas. Now, the Chinese, if their grip sort of does take hold, I think the Buddhists will also have problems. And that is one of the reasons why Aung San Suu Kyi or the leadership in Myanmar couldn't take a position one way or the other, despite Western pressure. It's not that they were not cognizant of it, but there are domestic compulsions also that guide them. And I think it is these factors that one needs to look at when taking a strategic view of what happens. For India, it is certainly a worrying thing, apart from the fact that they are building up, shall I say, strong areas of influence around us, but they're also adding to that military components, ports, etc., which are coming up. And I don't know whether you noticed, there was a very small item in one of the newspapers about Myanmar starting a ferry service to the Andamans, a remote island in the Andamans. I don't understand why, and they say that that's to service the Cocoa Islands, but why come to the Andamans? So these are all questions that come up now, which we'll have to look at from a totally different light and perspective. And I think it is certainly a matter of worry for us, and we'll have to figure out ways in which we can try and, shall I say, retrieve our influence there and try and ensure that the Chinese influence doesn't acquire a negative strategic and security dimension.
Okay, all right. I'll come to you, General, for another perspective really on the security aspect, but Mr. Karju wanted to add something.
I think the ethnic situation in Myanmar has to be seen. The core there are the Burman ethnicity. Now, then there are lots of other ethnic groups. And the Burmans have always had this anxiety towards China, that China uses other smaller ethnics like the Kachins, the Wa, etc., and uses them against the Burmans. The state is, the army is really controlled. The Myanmar army is a Burman army. Its core was that starting from the 1940s, and it has persisted. Now, so there is the Buddhist angle, but in addition to that, there is the ethnic angle, and Burmese ethnicity is terribly complex because, and which brings me to one fact which we shouldn't overlook, that there is a curious xenophobia there. because of the way the British treated Myanmar, or Burma as it was then called, allowing a settlement, a lot of people from the subcontinent. So there was this xenophobia against those people who had settled from the subcontinent, not only the Rohingyas, but the others, and there was an enormous amount of migration out, forced migration out of Myanmar in the 1960s, which led to enormous trouble between India and Myanmar. There are Indians in Myanmar of Indian origin, of Central Indian origin, who are still stateless. So it is not only the Rohingyas, that is one aspect, but there is this problem which still persists, and we often overlook it, but it's a fact.
Sure. Okay. All right. From a security point of view, General, how should we be looking at all of this?
You know, I think the security calculus has changed now. And I think the best way to get security into India's northeast is to really get the Act East policy going. It's now I don't think we should really be looking at guns. I think you have to look at totally different mechanisms. Insurgency has come down a very great deal as far as northeast India is concerned, except for Manipur where there's some level of violence. In other areas, by and large, it is under control. And the capacity of the insurgents to stay and have bases across the border in Myanmar is also getting squeezed. Now, I think one of the problems which we will have to face is if this friendship between China and Myanmar develops into a bear hug, as we call it. I'm concerned because some of the insurgent groups within India have actually gone to China for training, and then their move back could be facilitated. You know, those are the problems which we will have to deal with. But I think the best course of action is to really get the Act East policy going, to get your communication corridors onto Myanmar and onto Thailand going. We are talking of BCIM, we are talking of other structures. You know, we are also revitalizing the railway infrastructure within Thailand. Now, I think all these things have to be given a push, and I think we require a dedicated organization to do so. Our problem has been that while the intentions have been very good, the delivery mechanisms on the ground have remained slightly weak. One of my colleagues from Myanmar had actually told me, he says, when the Chinese premier comes and tells us we'll give you a road within 1 year, within 1 year we have that road or bridge or whatever has been promised. But when the Indian premier says so, and we are going back to Dr. Manmohan Singh's time, he says 10 years down the road, it is still on paper. So I think those are the things which we need to address. We have a fund of goodwill. A very large number of the insurgent groups who were in Myanmar earlier had actually taken refuge in India. Now they are back there. So we have a fund of goodwill, but I think security-wise we have to build our economic component in a much stronger way, one. Number two, we could be a part of the defense supplying group as far as Myanmar is concerned. Today they get 80 to 90% of their weaponry from China. I think we can make a change in that. We have started supplying them artillery guns, radars and equipment like that. But we can be a major defense supplier. And towards those ends, towards cooperation of that nature, I think we should be able to at least contain to some extent the influence which China has over this country.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Ranade?
Two quick points I'd like to make. One is we should not forget that the Chinese have started, in fact have been, mediating between the Myanmar army and the government, as well as the ethnic groups like the Was, etc. And the Was particularly and another are of Chinese descent. So there have been a lot of reports about, in fact, supplies going to these people, etc. The second, when we talk about the BCIM, we have to be very, very careful because the economies of the Northeast, our Northeast, are very fragile. The population is fragile. Our own connectivity between the mainland and these people is very, very weak. So when we talk of BCIM, what are we really looking at? I think we have to be very, very careful. What we will see is Chinese personnel coming in to build the roadways and the linkages because they are the ones who can do it very quickly. And today when you have problems in the Northeast or problems of who belongs to which place, you're going to have another element coming in. including an element which already lays claim to Arunachal Pradesh. So I think we have to think things very carefully. We can't go by, gunshot estimates. So I think these are things, Act East is good, we can act East, but we have to be very clear on what areas we are going to act East on.
Okay,
that is a note of caution I'd like to.
Time now to get closing comments from all my guests. I've got 2 minutes left on the program, so I'm going to ask you to be brief with the best way forward. Starting first with you, Ambassador.
I think we've got to increase our interaction with Myanmar very, very substantially. We've got to pay much greater attention at the execution of the projects we've committed to. The External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, said recently that that record is improving, but I think far more work is needed in that direction. And we've got to think of innovative ways.
Think out of the box
Think
and implement.
out of the box. And lastly, though it will be very difficult, we've got to talk to the West that hounding Myanmar will only ensure the tightening of the Chinese embrace of that country. And this hounding, my last point, this hounding of Aung San Suu Kyi must end. She's a great nationalist. And that was what was overlooked when the West in the past thought that she was an icon of liberty.
Okay.
Only.
In the last 6 months, 5 mediation offers have been made from the US to India as far as the Kashmir issue is concerned. It's time now for us to do the reverse and probably offer some kind of mediation as far as Myanmar is concerned, is what you're suggesting. All right, General, the best way forward, closing comments?
No, I will go completely with what Ambassador Kaju has said. But I think as far as economic cooperation is concerned and building the infrastructure, I don't visualize when I'm talking of building infrastructure, getting the Chinese on board. Certainly not in Indian territory. So what we do in our territory will be ours. It is going to be an Indian project in India. China can do whatever they have to do in their side. But unless we sort out connectivity issues, road connectivity, rail connectivity, and air connectivity, we have to sort out all these 3 issues. India can be the hub. The Northeast can be the hub for many things, for sports, for medical facilities, where the entire, from Myanmar and Thailand, people can come for treatment. So there are many things which we can do in India which will revitalize the Northeast and which will actually revitalize the entire region.
Right.
And I think we should go for that.
Okay, all right. And Mr. Ranade, close the show for us with the concluding
Well,
remarks.
I think we should maintain not only our engagement with Myanmar, we need to improve it, we need to escalate it to whatever levels we can. We certainly need to keep talking to the West. It's not that we are not talking to them. I think maybe talk a bit louder. As you said, if they can talk to us about Kashmir, why don't we talk to them about Myanmar? But I think we also need to engage with the West and at international fora on the Rohingya issue, where we can take a position which the Myanmaris are not uncomfortable with and which suits us also. Right. So that kind of a situation we'll have to nuance and take it forward. And I think that will help us in preventing the Chinese from acquiring even more space in Myanmar.
Okay, all right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of India's World. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. We'd like to hear from you as well. Do share your feedback with us. Our email ID is indiasworld.feedback@gmail.com. You can also tweet to us using our Twitter handles at FRP09 and at Rajya Sabha TV. That's it from me. See you again next time.